set the machine up on your floor. Number one is this paper hopper is going to be taken off, and it's attached to the machine by the means of 4 screws. And the screws will be left in the frame. So you basically take the screws out, hold the hopper up there, put the screws in, tighten them up. The second thing you want to do with the hopper is take the sheet that you're going to be running. This is a 9 by 11 inch sheet. And basically you just want to set these paper guides up so that when the sheet comes into the hopper, it doesn't hit this corner here, but it will hit this corner, and just slightly jog the sheet so that the sheet sits into the hopper and not all over the place. And then longer sheets, obviously you just loosen the 2 wing screws, move this out of the way. Wider sheets, you loosen the 2 wing nuts and move them back. That's basically what you do with the hopper. 4 screws mounts the hopper. The next thing is on the feeder, we have a magazine, which is right here. This is going to come to you off the machine. There's a big lock wing nut over here, and basically this will be left on the bracket. This magazine will be off the machine. This is held onto the feeder by means of 4 screws. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. These 4 screws are going to be left in these black brackets. So what you do is you unscrew them from the black bracket, screw them through the magazine into the bracket. There's 2 on this side, 2 on this side. And then what you do is this bracket here, this threaded screw goes through this bracket, this slides back and forth. Tighten this up to where the magazine is on about a 30-degree angle. And that should be suffice on that angle that you see now. Tighten it up as much as you could tighten it, and the magazine will be fine. All the balls from the feeder will be placed in a plastic bag, and it'll be marked feeder. So that means you put all the balls from the feeder plastic bag into the ball rails. When you come to the reinforcer, you're going to have 2 1-inch balls. They'll be in a bag, the little bicycle, and its weights. The weights basically go here. The balls get placed in the 2 holes in the ball rail, and the bicycle folds in its slot and sits there. Now, the weights, the only time you use the weights is if you're running stock that's either clay coat or very shiny, high gloss stock, and the belt is worn a little bit. Then you apply, you have 2 different thicknesses on these weights. This one's 1/4 of an inch, this is 1/8. And all you're doing is you're applying a little bit more weight to this bicycle, which in turn presses the paper on the belt that's below it to drive the sheet in there. If the sheet is running fine, do not apply weights, because what you'll end up with is an overlap where one sheet comes in, drives on top of that sheet, and that's an overlapping situation. Then when the cutter cuts, you're going to have a piece of paper stuck under here. So what you want to do, your basic setup is 1 bicycle, no weights, the 2 balls, leave the weights here, and the next thing that's very important, when you take the machine out of the crate, this bracket here is going to be laying down here for reasons that the crate isn't that high. The spring will come off of here. This bracket's laying here. You loosen the screw, bring this bracket to a 12 o'clock position, tighten it up, take this spring, attach it here, and that's it. The Mylar, as you can see when you put the roll of Mylar on, all right, the glue side of the Mylar is facing the feeder, or downward. This is the glue side, this is the outside of the film. It wraps around this spool, this little guide spool here, goes around this guide spool here, all right? The glue now is facing up, so that when it comes around, the glue ends up facing downward. And the way we start the film, after everything is set up on your floor with this at a 12 o'clock position, the roll of film is placed on here, the glue is facing down, you take the film and you just wrap it around this roller and let maybe 1/4 of an inch of that film tack to the roller. So as it comes around, the sheet will pick that film up to start the flow of the Mylar, or film. The next thing you want to do is, now that we have this set up, you have the feeder, the paper catch magazine set up, the feeder magazine set up, the machine is leveled on the floor by means of 8 bolts half 13 bolts with nuts that we give you that goes in the bottom of the feet. The feet are threaded, you screw them up there, and as you level it on your floor, you tighten the nuts so that if it does shift, the machine doesn't go out of balance where it's rocking. The next thing you want to do is it has a plug on it. You plug it into a 110 outlet, 20 amp or 15 amp. In this case, 15 amp would be suffice. After it's plugged in, there's a circuit breaker on the side. You flip the circuit breaker on. The light will come on to indicate that there is voltage or low voltage going to the machine. The machine has its own transformer for low voltage. The next thing that's going to happen is the counter will come up to a number. The number that you see now is the number that we just ran 13 sheets, so it has a number of 13. To clear the counter at any time, I will go back to this, but you hit these two buttons right here and it zeroes it. Now, I just turned the circuit breaker on. I got my Mylar sitting here. I turn my heater on because I'm running heat seal Mylar. I'm not running pressure sensitive right now. This switch turns on the heat controller. Give it a minute. It'll come up and tell you exactly what the temperature is. There's a little thermocouple under here. So right now it's sensing that this roll is at 166 degrees. The reason why it's at 166 degrees is because I had the machine on and I shut it off. If you want to know what the set point, to set the heat for this roller, you press this button right here. It's going to tell you Fahrenheit. My set point is 205 degrees. With Avent's low temperature Mylar or low temperature film, we're going to run this reinforcer about 200 degrees, 205 degrees on 90-pound index. This film works very well. The less heat that you can apply to this film, the flatter the sheet will stay. The more heat I apply, the more bolt this sheet will come out of the machine. So with this film, we run it about 200 to 205 degrees on a 90-pound index, and it works out very well. If I want, going back to the heat controller, the button over here right next to the heat controller turns it on and off. If I was running pressure sensitive film or film that did not require heat, you just hit the button that shuts the heater off, shuts the heat controller off, let the roller cool down, and then you could apply pressure sensitive or release tape. When you want to go back to heat, hit the switch, give it a minute, let it come up. And if you want to check your set point to see what operating temperature you want to be at, the button all the way to the left, you press it down, hold it, and it's going to tell you your set point. Right now my set point is 205 degrees. If I want to increase the heat, it's the button on the far right, but I have to hold the button on the left to increase. I press the button once, it goes up 1 degree. Twice, 2 degrees, 3, 4, 5. Hold your finger on the button and it'll just keep going up. It'll go up to about 275, that's the high limit. But, like I said, with this film, you don't want to run it that high, you want to run it as low temperature as possible to stick on the paper. And we find roughly 200 degrees, 205 degrees. Now, to lower it, to lower my set point, the button that's in the middle, there's an arrow marking down. That's to lower the set point. So I have to hold the button on the left, press the middle one until I come to the point of 200 degrees. And when I get there, I release the middle button. I'm at 199. I hit this button, I'm at 200. Release the left button and let the machine sit, and you'll see it'll drop down, stay about 200, 201. As the machine is running, it's going to drop a little in temperature, maybe 5 degrees. That's normal. Don't even worry about it because the 5 degrees you're not going to see on this particular machine and this type of stock. So like I said, you want to be about 200 degrees. The next thing we have, right next to the counter, going to the right next to the heat controller, going to the left. This machine is equipped with a predetermined counter. This is not standard on our Model SR, but on this machine it has it. This is a very expensive counter. Now basically what this counter does is if you're running a job and you want only 100 pieces or 1,000 pieces or 2,000 pieces, whatever the number might be, you could program in the actual count that you want. Let's say I was running batches of 25. Rather than the operator see 25 come up, where he has to shut the feeder off. This is going to do it automatically. And the way you set the counter for the batch you want is the button all the way to the left is marked E. When you press it once, the numbers are going to flash here. Okay, now you see it's flashing 150. That means I have it set right now for 150 pieces. And what's going to happen when it hits the 150? It's going to stop the feeder. So I'm going to end up with 150, 151 pieces, roughly. Now, the way to start the feeder back up is I press the two buttons at the same time all the way to the right. One is marked with an arrow up, and the red one is marked with an R. If you press both of them at the same time, it clears it. It zeroes out the counter, but it still holds your predetermined count of 150 or whatever number you pick. Now, I'm going to change that number from 150, I'm going to change it to 10, just so you can see what happens. I hit E, the 0 flashes. I don't want to change that, but I want to change the digit right next to it. So this key, the second key to the right, has an arrow pointing to the left. That will move the digit. So watch what happens. I hit E, I go to the next digit, and I hit the arrow up to 1. Okay, now I go to the next digit, and I want this to go to 0, so I end up with 10 here. So now, when it hits 10, it's going to stop the feeder. Now, you just let it flash, and after 15 seconds, it goes back to 0. So you don't have to worry about it. And when you're programming it, that LED is going to be under the P. There's a P right here. Watch when I hit the E button. See the P? And the LED is for preset. And that's what we're doing. We're punching in a preset number. And that preset number could be whatever you want. It could be 1,000, it could be 100, it could be 50,000, whatever the number you want. If you don't want to use the counter feature, do not put the switch on. All this switch will do now is allow, every time the sheet comes by, the micro switch will pick it up and give us a pulse. Now, if I have this switch off, it's not going to give us a pulse. So if you don't want to use the counter, don't put the switch on. It's that simple. If you don't want it going on, if you want the count but you don't want it to go off, you don't want it to shut the feeder off, put in a high number, put in maybe 10,000. So this way you're running 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. It won't shut the feeder off, but it'll tell you exactly how many pieces it ran through there. And besides this counter, we have another counter on the side here. What this is also an option on this machine. This is called a shift counter. And basically what it is, in the morning when you come in, your setup man, your lead man, whoever, he zeroes out this counter by means of turning this switch, this key. He turns it, puts it back, takes the key out. During the day, this counter is going to tell you exactly how many pieces were ran through the machine. And nobody could zero this counter unless you have the key. So you could use it for a shift counter, or whenever your foreman walks around, he has the key. He could take a number. After an hour, we ran X amount of pieces, zeroes it out, takes the key out. That's all that counter is. We call it a shift counter. I'll put the key back in here. You could take the key out. You could leave the key in. And basically, the rest of the controls here are fairly straightforward. Feeder, reinforcer, and if you had an optional hole punch on the machine, these switches would control. These 5 switches control the hole punch. But you know that you do not have a hole punch, you don't even have to concern yourself with these switches. If you turn them on, nothing happens. They don't interfere with the feeder, they don't interfere with the reinforcer. So don't even worry about these. Right now we're going to talk about these 6 switches right here. Okay, to turn the feeder on, I hit the green button, I hit the red button to shut it. At any point in time, you hit the red button, it stops the feeder. Any point in time I want to stop the reinforcer, I hit the red button. This switch here says run, jog. If I put it over to the jog, the little white dot, over to the jog, that means that the feeder will only stay on as long as my finger is on this button. So when I'm running, obviously, I want to be in a run mode. I touch it once, it's on, hit the red, it shuts it off. Same thing with the reinforcer. When it's in jog, it's just, the motor is running only as long as I keep my finger on there. Now, you may not use this feature, you may use the feature. We just put it in as an added feature onto the machine. The next 2 items that we're going to talk about, which are probably the most important items here, other than the heat controller, are these 2-speed potentiometer knobs. This one is clearly marked and it says feeder speed. This one is marked SR speed. What these two units, or these two knobs do, they control how fast the sheets come off the feeder and go into the reinforcer. The one that says reinforcer controls how fast this applicating roller is turning. The way it's set up right now is on the reinforcer, you want this knob, it has a point on it. I don't know if you can see that from the video, but there is a point here. You want the reinforcer always to be at a 12 o'clock position. That means that this cutoff mechanism is only going to travel at so many RPMs. The faster the RPMs, the faster this travels around, the more erratic your cuts are. So we find by putting this at 12 o'clock will yield you about 4,500 sheets an hour, 11-inch sheets. That's where you want to operate this machine at. If you run shorter sheets, you may want to slow it down a little bit. But to give you a set point, you want to be about 12 o'clock. On the feeder, you could start out about 12 o'clock, but you're going to end up being about, I would say, about 2 o'clock. The key here on this machine is as you're running, I'm set at 12 o'clock on my reinforcer, straight up at this little point. I run my feeder in, and as the sheets are going through the machine, you want to keep this running so that this roller really doesn't stop. The more consistent your feed is, the more consistent your cut is. And when I speak about cut, I mean the cleaner cut on the edge of the sheet. Very little tails, you'll get those little whiskers. You're not going to get 100% perfect cut on this type of machine because of there's variables. There's grain long, there's grain short in your paper, there's moisture in your paper, how this is adjusted, how these gears are clean. So there's a lot of variables here. But what we look for is the best cut that we could possibly get and still get a good throughput through the machine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it on. The first thing you want to turn on is the reinforcer. The second thing I want to turn on is my feeder. This way you could see it run a little bit and then I'll explain exactly what's happening. Now, you notice when we first turned it on, the papers were very close together because I was moving the knobs. But the key is as the sheets come down, this sheet comes in, they go away, they get taken away, the next sheet comes in. You don't want them overlapping, you don't want them hitting back here because it will jam over here. You don't want this sheet to come in and wait there until the next sheet comes in. So it's basically, I set the reinforcer roughly around 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, and then I increase my feeder so that it's a constant flow of paper. And the way you put the paper into the feeder is very important also, which I'll get into that. The way this is set up right now, this is your cutting mechanism right here. This is a very delicate piece of the machine. And after you run this throughout the day, you're going to see paper dust, these little whiskers from the paper get caught on these gears. And all you want to do, maybe once a day, you might even have to do it twice a day, is take a little WD-40 and spray it at that gear. Spray about a ½ ounce of WD-40. It will wash any paper, fibers, dust off of this gear, which will keep the cutting mechanism as clean as possible so that it's nice and free. The key is free. It has to be free so it floats. This unit floats when it comes around, sits on the paper. It matches up with this finger. I'm going to jog a sheet in here so you can see exactly what's happening. As this sheet comes in, it triggers this photo eye. When it triggers this photo eye, this roller starts turning. There's a little finger in here that's underneath the board. Creates the gap, all right, which is very important. If I move this photo eye back too far, then this finger will not come up, and I will not have a gap between the sheets. So this will not know where to cut. So it's very important that as they're running, it looks exactly like this. Now I'm going to jog the sheet through here, and you can kind of see as it goes under here, this finger's going to come up. It's going to meet the other finger. Okay, now you can see it. This finger's sitting on the paper, and now this finger, the finger that was sitting here, is going to go away. This finger will fall in between the sheets to tell the mechanism where to cut. I could even duplicate that by turning this knob here when the machine is off. Now you'll see this finger is going to fall in the slot, which it is right now, picks up the gap between the two sheets, and as it comes around, the blades are going to cut exactly where this finger is. And that's your cut. And that's exactly what you want. And as it's running, it's going to keep doing this. Now the key here is that your blades are sharp and the blades only cut mylar. The more they're out of adjustment where they're cutting paper, the shorter the life of the blades will be. So as you're running it, you want to make sure that you have the proper feed of the paper. You're not overdriving the sheet in by means of putting too many weights on here. You don't want to start tampering with this side, moving it towards the exit end, moving it towards the entry end. What you want is that bottom finger to be up around. If I'm looking at a clock, I want that to be about 1 o'clock. If it's at 12 o'clock, what's going to happen is you're going to get big mylar gaps. So basically where it's set now, when you get this machine, you look at it and remember where that finger is. It's roughly about 1 o'clock. I'm talking about the bottom finger. This finger has nothing to do with the bottom finger. It's independent. The only time they come together is when the two sheets meet. This finger is riding on the paper. It falls in between the gap. Any adjustments as far as cutting, if I'm cutting in on one side or the other side, I make those adjustments by means of these two set screws loosening this finger. Now I'm going to show you that. I'm going to get an Allen key and I'm going to show you that because that's very important. Going back to the adjustment of the cut, and the main thing here is that when you make the adjustment and you tighten these two set screws, do not over tighten the set screws. You loosen them up. You loosen both of them up. I'm not going to loosen both of them up. You hold the blade and you move this finger down or up depending on where to cut or how you want to adjust it. Once you make your adjustment, now we're talking about a very small adjustment, and you're just going to move that maybe 1 degree at a time. I snug the set screw up with 2 fingers, not my whole hand, 2 fingers, because you do not want to do damage to this clutch mechanism. And the biggest damage that's caused to this clutch mechanism is people over tightening these set screws. Do not do that. All you want to do is just 2 fingers, tighten it, tighten the other one up, 2 fingers, and that's it. You'll never move it. Try running a couple of sheets, see how your cut is. If you see it's cutting the trailing edge or leading edge, you make your adjustment, snug them up. That is going to take you some time to learn, well, if I move this finger this way, I'm cutting the trailing edge. If I move the finger the other way, I'm cutting the leading edge. So after you adjust it a few times, you'll get the hang of it and you'll know exactly which way to move it and how much you're moving it. But the key is do not over tighten the set screws. Now what I'm going to do is take some paper, put it in the feeder, run it for you. But the first thing I have to do is put this back to run, get this sheet to stop in its proper place, which you will because now it came off the photo eye and the photo eye stopped the applicating roller. When you take your paper, you don't want to start out with a whole handful of paper. You want to start out with maybe I have about a ½ inch of paper. And you're fanning this out, okay? This part, the wedge, goes into the feeder like so. And as the machine is running, you can take another small amount of paper, maybe even 3/4 or an inch of paper. And as it's running, the papers are coming out, they're falling into the hopper. You take another small ream of paper, you lift the back of it up, and you just put them under there. So you really never have to stop the machine. there's no benefit in trying to handle 2 to 3 inches of paper and pull this feeder up. It won't work. So you want to start out with maybe a 1/2 inch and then gradually go to 3/4 of an inch or 1 inch of paper at a time. And as it's running, you just take a little more paper, you put it in there. And as it's running, you take the paper out of the exit end of your hopper and you put them into your box. I'm going to turn it on now, and I'm going to turn the counter on so you can see exactly what happens when it hits its preset. So I turn this on, turn my feeder on. Now it hit 10, but in this case it's really 11. Like I said, you're always going to get 1 to 2 more than your actual count. And it stopped. It stopped the feeder saying, okay, there's 11 sheets in there. Do what you have to do. I'm waiting for you. So all I do now is I hit the 2 buttons on the right at the same time. It zeroes out the counter. Turn the feeder on again. It's going to feed another 10 to 11 sheets and stop. And it stops. Now, I'm going to change the count to 50 pieces. It'll flash, and then it'll stop flashing after 15 seconds. I'm going to zero it out with the 2 buttons to the right. Turn my feeder on, and I'm going to end up with about 51 pieces before it stops.